Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The sky turned black in an instant. One moment, Lucas Carter was halfway through his sandwich, fixing a faulty fuse box on the 28th floor of a downtown high-rise. The next, he was staring out the window at an unearthly darkness swallowing the city. It wasn't Turin eclipse. The sun didn't fade or dim, it simply vanished. At first, Lucas thought it was just a power outage, a strange one, sure, but nothing he hadn't dealt with before. But the light stayed off. The emergency systems didn't kick in. As he fumbled for his flashlight, he noticed something chilling. None of the cars on the street below were moving. Traffic lights were dead, too. The entire city was lifeless, except for the faint, panicked glow of phone screens coming on in offices and apartments around him. The city's usual hum had disappeared, replaced by an eerie silence. That silence was interrupted by the distant sound of something crashing, metal twisting, glass shattering. Lucas looked down and saw a delivery truck had plowed into a storefront. The driver stumbled out, dazed, looking around like the darkness had somehow blinded him. "What the hell is going on?" Lucas muttered, his hands shaking as he grabbed his tool bag and slung it over his shoulder. He needed to get home fast. The building stairwell was darker than he expected. His flashlight barely pierced the thick blackness around him, and each step seemed to echo unnaturally, as if the world itself was hollow. His mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. A freak storm, a massive solar flare. He reached for his phone to check the news, but there was no signal, no bars, no data, not even an emergency alert. By the time he reached the ground floor, the lobby was a mess. The night guard had bolted from his desk, and the revolving doors were jammed half open. Outside, the city was in chaos. People were running, screaming, calling for loved ones. Car alarms blared, but none of the vehicles moved. The sky above was a perfect black void. No stars, no moon, just endless darkness. Lucas fought the rising panic in his chest. He had to get home, check on his wife, Sarah. She'd been sick for the past week, barely able to get out of bed. His apartment was only a few blocks away, but the streets were quickly becoming a danger zone. People were abandoning their cars, running on foot, screaming about shadows, moving in the dark. He jogged past a convenience store, its windows smashed, looters inside grabbing whatever they could. A man ran out with an armful of water bottles, only to trip and spill them across the sidewalk. No one was thinking straight. Everyone was terrified, including Lucas. The first sign that something was truly wrong came in the form of a shrill, inhuman scream. Lucas froze in his tracks, turning toward the alley where the sound had come from. There, just at the edge of his flashlight's send beam, something moved. It was tall, too tall to be human. Its limbs were impossibly long, its skin a glossy black sheen that blended seamlessly with the darkness around it. The thing screeched again, its mouth opening too wide for its narrow face, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Lucas took a step back, heart pounding. He wasn't prepared for this. No one was. The creature lunged. Lucas barely dodged in time, stumbling into the street as the thing's claws raked across the pavement with a metallic screech. It moved faster than any living thing should, its body a blur of shadow. He ran, not daring to look back as the thing chased him down the deserted street. His apartment was only a block away, but it felt like miles. He sprinted, his lungs burning, heart hammering in his chest. He could hear the creature's footfalls behind him, quick, light, inhuman. And then just as he reached the front door of his building, the creature stopped. It let out a low guttural growl, then vanished back into the shadows, as if it had never been there. Lucas turned, panting, his flashlight shaking as he pointed it toward the darkness. Nothing. The street was empty, save for the distant screams of the terrified. He didn't waste any time. He raced up the stairs, 3 at a time, ignoring the pain in his leg. By the time he reached his apartment door, he was drenched in sweat, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the key. "Sarah?" he called out as he burst inside. The apartment was cold, eerily quiet, his breath fogged in front of him. He rushed to the bedroom, praying to find her safe. Sarah was there, sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. "Lucas, what's happening?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he admitted, sitting beside her and grabbing her hand. "The sun's gone, the power sign out everywhere, and there's something out there in the dark." Her grip tightened on his. "What do? We were going to be okay," he lied, forcing himself to stay calm. I'll figure this out.
For the next few hours, they huddled together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the city unraveling around them. The strange screeches and howls outside became more frequent, closer. Whatever those creatures were, they were multiplying, growing bolder.
Lucas knew they couldn't stay in the apartment forever. They needed food, supplies, and a plan.
But most importantly, they needed light. Without it, they were sitting duck. Morning, or what should have been morning, came and the city was still cloaked in darkness. Lucas made a decision. He couldn't just wait for help to come. No one was coming if the sun didn't return. Humanity was on the brink of extinction. I am going out, he said, pulling on his coat. I need to find a way to get the power back on. Sarah's eyes filled with fear. You can go out there, those things. I'll be careful, he said, though the memory of the creature still haunted him. I know how to get to the power grid. If I can restart it, at least we'll have light. Reluctantly, she nodded, squeezing his hand one last time before letting him go. Lucas packed a bag with what little supplies they had: a flashlight, a few tools, some food and water, and stepped back out into the eternal night. The streets were even more desolate now. Most of the panicked civilians had barricaded themselves in their homes or fled the city. The once bustling metropolis was now a ghost town with only the occasional scurrying shadow reminding him that he wasn't alone. He made his way toward the electrical substation where he'd worked countless times before. It was one of the few places that might still have backup power. If he could get the grid online, even partially, it would at least push back the darkness, give people a fighting chance. But as he approached the substation, he realized he wasn't the only one with this idea. A group of survivors, about a dozen of them, were gathered outside the fence, armed with makeshift weapons, pipes, crowbars, and kitchen knives. Their leader, a tall, muscular man with a shaved head, was barking orders at them, trying to break into the locked facility. Lucas hesitated. Approaching a group of desperate strangers could be just as dangerous as the creatures in the dark, but he needed access to the substation, and they seemed determined to get inside. He approached cautiously, hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. Hey, he called out, I am an electrician. I can help you get the power back on. The leader turned to him, eyes narrowing. And why should we trust you? Because without me, you were not getting that grid up, Lucas said, and you were going to need power if you want to survive. The man considered this for a moment before nodding. Fine. But if you try anything, you were dead. Got it? Lucas nodded, swallowing his nerve. Lucas stepped through the group cautiously, feeling their suspicious eyes on him as he approached the substation's fence. It had been a while since he'd been here for work, but he knew the layout like the back of his hand. He could see the damage already. Chunks of the wiring had been ripped out, and parts of the grid control system looked fried. It wasn't going to be an easy fix, but it was possible. You're going to need to give me some space, waving the survivors back. The last thing he needed was someone crowding him while he tried to rewire a live circuit. The leader, who had introduced himself as Marcus, grunted but gestured for the others to step back. Lucas got to work, pulling out a few tools from his bag. His hands shook slightly from the cold and the anxiety gnawing at him, but he forced himself to focus. He was almost done when something crashed in the distance, a loud metallic thud that echoed through the city streets, followed by a long, bone-chilling screech. The group tensed immediately, eyes darting toward the source of the sound. Lucas glanced over his shoulder, his stomach twisting. He had a bad feeling. They're coming, in, the group muttered, clutching her metal pipe tightly. That those things, they always come when it's quiet. Lucas worked faster, sweat forming on his brow despite the cold. The power grid was close to coming back online, but it wasn't there yet. He just needed a few more minutes. The screeching grew louder. Closer, a shadow darted across the far end of the street, a long, spindly figure moving unnaturally fast. Lucas felt a surge of adrenaline if he didn't get the power up. Now they were all dead. Come on, he muttered, his fingers flying over the control. The system buzzed to life, flickering, then stabilizing with a low hum. The lights in the substation flickered and then stayed on, casting a pale glow over the area. It's working, one of the survivors shouted, relief in their voice. But the relief was short-lived. As the first few streetlights buzzed on, the screeching intensified. The creatures hated the light, but they weren't running this time. They were angry, furious. Lucas barely had time to step back before one of them launched itself at the fence, its elongated limbs wrapping around the metal bar. The thing hissed, its milky white eyes glowing faintly as it clawed at the barrier.
Its skin was slick and black as if it had been pulled straight from the shadows themselves.
Back, get back, Marcus shouted, swinging a crowbar at the creature.
It screeched in response, recoiling just enough for Marcus to drive the metal bar into its head. The creature crumpled to the ground, twitching. More were coming, dozens of them, skittering across the streets, leaping from rooftops, crawling out of the darkness. The survivors formed a tight circle, weapons raised, but they were outnumbered, and the creatures weren't stopping. "Get inside," Lucas yelled, backing toward the substation. "DC, we can hold them off in here." They didn't need to be told twice. The group rushed inside, slamming the heavy door shut, just as the creatures swarmed the fence. The metal rattled violently as they clawed at it, their screeches filling the air. Inside the substation was a tight space filled with humming machinery and a faint smell of ozone. It wasn't exactly secure, but it was better than being out in the open. Marcus paced, his brow furrowed in frustration. "Terry, we need more than just these lights. This is barely keeping them at bay." Lucas nodded, wiping sweat from his face. "The grid, sell up. But it's, I need to get to the main power plant if we want to light up the whole city. But that's miles away, and who knows what kind of condition it's in after all this." Marie, a quiet woman who had stuck close to Lucas during the chaos, finally spoke up. "We don't have a choice, do we? We can survive like this. Those things won't stop until we all dead." Lucas glanced at her, recognizing the fear in her eyes. It was the same fear everyone had. The same fear gnawing at him, too, but she was right. Sitting in the substation wasn't a long-term plan. They needed real power, something that would give them more than a few flickering light. He looked around at the group. Most of them were battered, exhausted, and scared out of their mind. But they were all that was left of this part of the city, and they had to make a stand. "We go to the power plant," Lucas said firmly. "It's our best shot." Marcus nodded slowly. "And what about those things out there? Not just gonna let us walk out of here?" Lucas clenched his jaw. That was the problem. The creatures were relentless, swarming anything that moved. He'd have seen them up close now, seen their speed, their hunger. They weren't just mindless beasts. They were something else, something worse. But they couldn't stay here. The lights wouldn't last, and when the power finally cut out again, the creatures would break through that fence without hesitation. "We'll need weapons, whatever we can find," Terry Lucas said. "Do it, and we move fast. No one gets left behind." The group nodded, gathering whatever they could use as makeshift weapons. A few of them had found flashlights and batteries, their beams cutting through the heavy darkness outside. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Marcus hefted his crowbar, looking grim. "Tari, let's get this over with." Lucas led the way, pushing open the door just enough for them to slip out one by one. The street was eerily quiet now, the creatures having retreated into the shadows, but he could feel them watching, waiting. They moved quickly, sticking to the dim pools of light cast by the street lamp. Every flicker of movement in the shadows made Lucas' psyche heart skip a beat, but they pressed on, heading toward the distant outline of the power plant. It loomed like a dark monolith against the endless black sky. Halfway there, the creatures struck again. They came from above this time, dropping from the rooftops with terrifying speed. One of the survivors screamed as a creature grabbed him, dragging him into the shadows. The others swung their makeshift weapons, beating back the attackers as best they could. "Run!" Lucas shouted, swinging his flashlight wildly as he bolted down the street. The group scattered, running toward the power plant, their footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence. Lucas didn't dare look back. He could hear the creatures behind them gaining ground. He pushed harder, his lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. Finally, the power plant's gates came into view. Lucas slammed into them, fumbling with the old lock until it gave way, and the group poured inside, panting and terrified. They lingered outside, watching from the shadows, their milky eyes glowing faintly in the distance. "We were safe for now," Marie panted, leaning against a wall. Lucas wasn't so sure. The power plant was massive, a maze of rusting machinery and silent generators. Getting it back online was going to be a nightmare, especially with those creatures still out there. He glanced at the others. They were exhausted, barely holding on. But this was their last chance. If they didn't get the city power grid fully online, it wouldn't matter how long they hid, the darkness would eventually consume them. Lucas took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Here, I'll need help getting the generators running. It's going to take all of us." The group nodded, but determined.
There was no other option. As Lucas moved deeper into the power plant, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Something worse than the creatures outside. There was a tension in the air, an almost oppressive darkness that seemed to pulse and shift with every step he took. And then he saw it. In the distance, half hidden behind the massive turbines, stood a figure. Dressed in dark robes, the figure's face was obscured by a hood, but Lucas could feel its gaze on him. It wasn't one of the creatures, it was something else, something human. Before he could call out, the figure vanished into the shadow. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he turned back to the group. Shirobare, we're not alone in here. The others exchanged nervous glances. Let's just focus on the generators, Marcus said, gripping his crowbar tighter. But Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that whatever or whoever was in the power plant with them wasn't going to make this easy. As they worked, the lights flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows that danced across the wall. Every creak and groan of the machinery made Lucas' own nerves fray a little more. And then, just as they were about to bring the main generator online, a voice echoed through the plant. You shouldn't tell him here. Lucas spun around, but there was no one there. The figure from earlier stepped out of the shadows again, this time closer. Its hood was pulled back, revealing a face half covered in strange markings glowing faintly in the darkness. You were meddling with forces you don't understand, Ferdic, the figure said, its voice low and threatening. Lucas stood his ground, heart racing. We were trying to survive. The figure smiled, chilling expression. Before Lucas could respond, the figure melted back into the shadows, disappearing as it had appeared. Lucas turned to the others, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Die cries, finish this. The main generator roared to life with a deafening hum, and for the first time since the sun had disappeared, the city's lights blazed back on. But as the light flooded the streets, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just saved themselves. They had awakened something far worse.